They didn't just laugh, they dismissed it. To German soldiers shaped by speed, precision, and doctrine, the American M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun looked like a mistake on the battlefield. It was too large, too heavy, too deliberate. In their experience, a machine gun existed to suppress infantry, to force men into the dirt while maneuver decided the fight. This weapon appeared to violate that principle entirely. To them, it was excess, not engineering. That judgment would be paid for in blood. The first true encounters came in late 1942 during the North African campaign in Tunisia. German units had already fought across Europe and North Africa and believed they understood combat at this scale. Open terrain, limited cover, predictable engagement distances. Machine gun doctrine was trusted and proven. You identified the firing position, pinned it down, maneuvered, and closed the distance. It had worked before. There was no reason it should fail now. Until the Americans deployed the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun. When it opened fire, the battlefield changed its rules. The sound alone broke expectation. It was deeper and slower than the tearing burst of an MG-42. It did not chatter, it did not scream, it struck. Each round carried mass, and that mass became consequence. Sandbags collapsed, stone walls split apart, vehicle engines seized and burned where they stood. Cover that had protected soldiers for years stopped working in seconds. German infantry quickly understood that the threat was not only the gun, but what it ignored. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun did not care if its target was a man, a truck, a weapon crew, or a position believed to be secure. Anything within its effective range was vulnerable. Material did not matter. Intention did not matter. This was not suppression fire, it was denial. And before we go any further, if you believe these stories matter, if you believe the weapons, decisions, and sacrifices of these legendary warriors deserve to be remembered, follow this channel and share this video. By doing so, you help preserve the legacy of the men who stood their ground and shaped history through courage, discipline, and sacrifice. As engagements continued, tension escalated. Crews waited for the gun to overheat. It didn't. They waited for the firing to slow as barrels wore down or mechanisms failed. It didn't. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun maintained its rhythm, methodical and unhurried, delivering destruction at distances where German infantry believed themselves beyond reach. Attempts to rush the position failed because the approach itself had become lethal. What shattered expectations entirely was endurance. Unlike lighter machine guns that exhausted themselves under sustained fire, the 50 caliber was built for patience. It did not demand urgency from its crew. It punished urgency in the enemy. Every second it remained active expanded its influence across the battlefield, forcing attackers to rethink routes, timing, and even the feasibility of the assault itself. The human consequence did not arrive in medals or headlines, but in reports. German after-action documents began referencing heavy American machine guns with unusual emphasis. Movements slowed, attacks were postponed, positions once considered viable were now avoided. The psychological shift was subtle but permanent. Soldiers did not panic, they hesitated, and in war, hesitation is often fatal. When the firing finally stopped, nothing dramatic followed. No counterattack, no immediate advance. The silence did not invite movement because silence no longer meant safety. It meant the crew had simply paused, adjusted, or selected a new target. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun did not dominate the battlefield through speed or novelty. It mattered because it redefined what could no longer be trusted: cover, distance, time. the assumptions infantry relied upon for survival were quietly stripped away. And once that realization set in, the laughter vanished. The M2 Browning did not begin as a symbol of power or fear. It began as a problem that refused to go away. During the final years of the First World War, American forces encountered a limitation that small arms could not overcome. Rifles and light machine guns were effective against infantry, but they struggled against aircraft, armored vehicles, and fortified positions. The battlefield was changing, and the tools designed for it were falling behind. In 1917, General John J. Pershing issued a request that many designers quietly avoided. He wanted a machine gun powerful enough to engage low-flying aircraft and penetrate light armor, while still remaining reliable in field conditions. It was not a demand for innovation in theory, but in scale. The weapon did not need to be clever, it needed to be decisive. John Moses Browning understood this immediately. Rather than designing something entirely new, he chose a more dangerous path. He took what already worked and pushed it beyond what others thought practical. His earlier machine gun designs had proven reliable, controllable, and mechanically elegant. Browning's insight was simple. If the mechanism could handle more force, then the battlefield could be reshaped around it. The result was the .50 Browning machine gun cartridge, a round developed not for marksmanship, but for authority. Larger, heavier, and carrying immense energy, it was designed to remain lethal at distances where conventional weapons lost effectiveness. Early prototypes of the gun itself, such as the water-cooled M1921, were heavy and awkward, but they demonstrated something critical. The concept worked. At first, even American planners hesitated. The gun was massive, slow to move, and required careful mounting. Many believed it would remain a specialized anti-aircraft tool, too cumbersome for widespread use. But Browning's design refused to stay confined. As engineers refined the platform through the 1920s and 1930s, water cooling gave way to air-cooled barrels. Receivers were strengthened. Feed mechanisms were redesigned to allow ammunition to enter from either side, making the weapon adaptable to almost any mounting configuration. What emerged was not just an improved machine gun, but a universal system. The standardized M2, officially adopted in the early 1930s, could be mounted on tripods, vehicles, tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels with minimal modification. This flexibility was not accidental. It was the quiet result of Browning's refusal to specialize the weapon too narrowly. Many European powers chose a different path. They designed specific weapons for specific roles, optimizing performance at the cost of adaptability. The American approach, embodied in the M2, favored longevity and versatility. One gun, endlessly reconfigured, supported by an industrial system capable of producing it in massive numbers. When the Second World War began, this difference became decisive. While other nations scrambled to adapt weapons to new roles, the M2 simply transitioned into them. It did not need to be reinvented, it needed only to be mounted and supplied. The expectation had been that such a heavy, powerful weapon would be outdated quickly, replaced by cannons or more advanced systems. Instead, it proved stubbornly relevant. It fired consistently, it endured environmental abuse, it tolerated poor maintenance better than most complex designs. The consequence of Browning's original decision became clear not in a single battle, but across an entire war. The M2 was not defined by innovation in any one area, but by its refusal to fail across all of them. It became a constant presence, familiar to its crews and increasingly feared by those who faced it. By the time the gun reached full maturity, John Moses Browning was gone, but his idea remained intact. He had not built a weapon for a single conflict. He had built a solution that scaled with the violence of the 20th century. And the M2 was only just beginning to show what it could do. By the time the Second World War reached full scale, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was no longer an experiment or a theoretical solution. It was a finished weapon entering a global conflict that demanded reliability above all else. While other systems were still being adapted to new roles, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was already prepared to be used almost anywhere it could be mounted and supplied with ammunition. This adaptability defined its presence throughout the war. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun appeared on American trucks moving through North Africa, mounted on ring mounts to defend convoys against ambush and air attack. It was installed on tanks as a commander's weapon, giving armored crews the ability to engage infantry, light vehicles, and aircraft without relying on the main gun. On naval vessels, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun guarded decks and shore parties, providing immediate and flexible firepower in environments where heavier weapons were impractical. Its most visible and controversial role, however, emerged in the air. American bombers did not rely on speed or altitude alone for survival. They relied on overlapping fields of fire created by multiple M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns. Aircraft like the B-17 Flying Fortress carried these guns in the nose, waist, tail, dorsal, and ventral positions, transforming the bomber into a moving defensive system. German fighter pilots quickly learned that approaching from predictable angles meant flying directly into sustained 50 caliber fire that did not fade after a few seconds. The expectation among many European air forces had been that rifle caliber machine guns or cannons would define aerial combat. The American decision to rely heavily on the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun challenged that assumption. Instead of fewer, larger cannons, American aircraft often carried many 50 caliber guns, creating volume, redundancy, and reliability. Even when one position was damaged, others continued firing. On the ground, the same logic applied. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was not assigned a single role. Infantry units used it on tripods to dominate open terrain and deny movement. Armored units used it to protect tanks from close-range threats. Airfields used it as a defensive perimeter weapon, capable of engaging both aircraft and ground attackers. In every role, the weapon imposed a simple reality: if it could see you, it could reach you. As the war progressed, German forces began to recognize the sound and effect of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun as something distinct from lighter weapons. It did not suppress in short bursts, it controlled space. Infantry units altered movement patterns, avoiding open approaches that had once been considered manageable. Vehicles learned to disperse or halt entirely when the weapon was present. Even temporary exposure could be fatal. What escalated the threat further was the weapon's consistency across theaters. Whether in the deserts of North Africa, the hedgerows of Normandy, the forests of the Ardennes, or the islands of the Pacific, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun performed the same way. Dust, cold, heat, and rain did not fundamentally change its behavior. For the soldiers facing it, this predictability was unsettling. There was no environmental weakness to exploit. The break in expectation came from realization rather than surprise. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was not rare, it was not limited, It was not reserved for elite units or critical positions alone. It was everywhere. Mounted on almost anything that moved or defended American forces, it became a constant factor in planning and execution. The human consequence was cumulative. German soldiers did not speak of the weapon as a single encounter, but as a recurring presence. It shaped routes, slowed advances, and increased casualties among units forced to cross open ground. It did not dominate headlines, but it dominated decisions. When fighting ended in a given sector and the guns fell silent, the absence of fire did not immediately restore confidence. Silence did not mean safety. It meant the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun had shifted its attention elsewhere. And in a war defined by movement and momentum, that alone was enough to alter outcomes.
The power of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun often led to a simple assumption among those who faced it, that such force must come at the cost of control. Many believed a weapon firing a cartridge of this size would be violent to itself, tearing its own components apart under sustained fire. In reality, the effectiveness of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun came not from brute strength alone, but from a mechanical system designed to manage that strength with precision. At the heart of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is a short recoil operating system. When the weapon is fired, the barrel and bolts are locked together and move rearward as a single unit for a short distance under recoil. This movement absorbs a significant portion of the energy generated by the 50 BMG cartridge before the system begins to unlock. Only after this initial rearward travel does the bolt separate from the barrel, allowing the spent casing to be extracted and ejected. This sequence is critical. By delaying the unlocking process, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun ensures that chamber pressure has dropped to safe levels before extraction begins. The result is not only reliability, but longevity. Components are not subjected to sudden destructive forces. Instead, stress is distributed across the system in a controlled manner, shot after shot, minute after minute. Many contemporary machine guns relied on lighter components and higher cyclic rates, trading durability for volume of fire. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun took the opposite approach. Its rate of fire was deliberate, its mass intentional. This allowed the weapon to remain stable under recoil, maintaining accuracy at ranges where lighter guns became increasingly erratic. The adjustable headspace and timing system further reinforced this reliability. Properly set, it ensured that each cartridge was chambered, fired, and extracted under optimal conditions. While this required trained crews, it also meant the weapon could be tuned to function consistently despite wear, environmental conditions, or variations in ammunition. German engineers studying captured examples of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun recognized this not as a flaw, but as a sign of mechanical maturity. The escalation of effectiveness became apparent during prolonged engagements. Where lighter machine guns overheated rapidly or suffered parts failure under sustained fire, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun continued operating. Barrels glowed, recoil hammered the mount, yet the system remained intact, its rhythm unchanged. The weapon did not rush to empty its belt. It worked methodically, conserving its own strength while exhausting the enemy's options. Expectations of mechanical failure were repeatedly disproven. Crews learned that if ammunition was available and the gun was properly mounted, the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun would continue firing far longer than those attempting to suppress it. This altered battlefield behavior. Assaults could not rely on waiting out the gun. Suppression tactics had to change, often requiring heavier weapons or indirect fire to neutralize a position. The human consequence was a growing sense of inevitability. Infantry under fire from the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun did not measure danger in seconds or bursts. They measured it in endurance. Every moment spent exposed increased the likelihood of casualties, not because the weapon fired faster, but because it refused to stop. When the firing finally ceased, it was rarely due to mechanical failure. More often, it was a tactical decision, a shift in targets, a pause to conserve ammunition, or the end of resistance in the area fired. In that silence, the reputation of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was reinforced once again. It was not a temperamental weapon. It was not a fragile one. It was a machine built to endure the violence it created. And that endurance was as much a weapon as the cartridge it fired.
The fear inspired by the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was never limited to the weapon itself. It extended to what it fired. The 50 BMG cartridge was designed with a clear purpose: to deliver energy, penetration, and effect at ranges where most weapons became uncertain. From the beginning, the ammunition family reflected the same philosophy as the gun: adaptability without compromise. Standard ball rounds provided mass and consistency, capable of reaching far beyond conventional infantry engagement distances. Armor-piercing rounds added a new dimension, allowing the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun to defeat light armor, vehicle engines, and fortified positions with alarming reliability. Incendiary and armor-piercing incendiary rounds brought a psychological effect that matched their physical damage, igniting fuel, ammunition, and aircraft structures on impact. Tracer variants extended the gun's control over space, guiding fire across wide arcs and allowing crews to adjust without pausing. For those on the receiving end, the distinction between these rounds mattered less than the result. Vehicles burned, aircraft fell apart in mid-air. Positions that once offered protection became liabilities. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was not firing blindly. It was firing with intent, and its ammunition ensured that intent was fulfilled. Nowhere was this more evident than in the M45 Maxim mount, commonly known as the Quad 50. 4 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns mounted together, powered and traversed as a single unit, transformed the weapon from a powerful tool into an overwhelming presence. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft system, the Quad 50 quickly proved devastating against ground targets. Infantry assaults collapsed under its volume of fire. Aircraft attacks were broken off before they could align. Entire sectors of the battlefield became untouchable while it remained operational. The expectation had been that such systems would be rare or situational. Instead, the Quad 50 became a familiar sight defending convoys, airfields, and forward positions. Its flexibility meant it could track aircraft one moment and sweep terrain the next. For German forces, encountering a Quad 50 was not a tactical problem, it was a warning. Advancing meant entering a space where survival was no longer a reasonable assumption. Alongside this reputation grew a persistent myth that the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun violated the Geneva Convention when used against personnel. This belief endured not because it was true, but because the weapon's effects felt excessive. There was no ban, no prohibition. The hatred surrounding the gun stemmed from its effectiveness, not its legality. It killed decisively, and it did so within the rules of war, leaving no comfortable explanation for those who faced it. The war ended, but the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun did not. It moved forward into Korea, then Vietnam, and into conflicts that followed. The design evolved: heavier barrels, improved materials, vehicle shields, remote weapon stations, but the core mechanism remained unchanged. Later developments such as the M2A1 improved safety and usability with features like quick-change barrels and fixed headspace, yet the identity of the weapon stayed intact. What truly defines the legacy of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is not longevity alone, but relevance. Few weapons remain effective across such a broad range of roles and eras without fundamental redesign.
Fewer still maintain the same psychological weight they carried generations earlier. When the gun fires today, it does not sound modern, it sounds familiar. The same deep, measured rhythm that echoed across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific continues to define its presence. It is not a relic, it is a reminder. And when the firing stops, the silence carries the same meaning it always has. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is not finished. It is simply waiting.